Stephen A. Young is an author, musician, and natural philosopher known by the music alias Hedflux, and also for his book, A Fool's Wisdom: Science, Conspiracies, and the Secret Art of Alchemy. Based in Scotland, a husband and father of three, he holds a Master of Science and PhD in theoretical physics, and since departing academia in 2005, created a solo career as an independent music producer, creating over 100 records, including remixes and library works, and performing at clubs and festivals internationally. From the years 2015 through 2018, Steve spent some time soul-seeking in Central America and Hawaii, participating in shamanic ceremonies, learning alchemy, and the traditional ways of healing with plant medicines and music. The first fruits of this new knowledge was audio alchemy, a practical method of music production based in Hermetic teachings and a complete set of correspondences between music and alchemy. This was taught to students in a series of retreats in Hawaii and some smaller workshops throughout the US and Europe. And on April 1st, 2024, after more than 2 years in development, he released his first book, A Fool's Wisdom, which challenges contemporary scientific dogmas in light of the alchemical perspective. And his book was a #1 bestseller in Western philosophy on Amazon US. And for this episode, this is what we cover: his new book, A Fool's Wisdom. And I gotta commend Steve for his bravery, because he is, to my knowledge, the first theoretical physicist to speak out against theoretical physics and several other dogmatic scientism fields of so-called study. And he strings them together in a pretty incredible way and shows how one sort of ties into the other, and much of society buys into this totally false paradigm that is propped up through these various scientific or scientism dogmas. And it is occulting alchemical knowledge, which leads one to the true nature of this realm, the true knowledge of this realm, the true nature of the self, and true knowledge of the self. And this book is awesome. It's incredible. I remember pulling my wife aside a couple of times as I began reading it, because, as you know, I've put a lot of attention into the failed germ paradigm, and I have not yet taken a deep dive into some of these other fields that relate to that. And Steve does a good job showing how all of them relate to each other to create this false paradigm. And it's really an example of putting words to something that I've always known deep down. So I call that remembering rather than learning. So I guess you could say Steve is helping us to remember. And if you're interested in the book, please head to the link in the show notes to check it out. Highly recommend it. And if you're not sure yet, just listen to this episode, and I think you might want to get the book afterwards. So thanks for tuning in. Much love, you guys, and enjoy the episode. All right, Steve, thanks for joining me, man. I'm really looking forward to this. So we're discussing A Fool's Wisdom: Science, Conspiracies, and the Secret Art of Alchemy. And I got to give you credit, man, because to speak about what you speak about in this book, you may be the first of your kind that I know of to go this deep. To speak about of the absurdity of what you've been indoctrinated with. So I got to give you credit for that first off. But yeah, let's just like jump into your background first and what led you to writing this book.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me on, Alec. Yeah, it's in writing a book, I think you have the freedom to like make your point a lot bigger and a lot more, to do a lot more justice, which is something I felt I could never really do on social media, just putting out, thoughts here and there. So a few years ago, after all the pandemonium, I sort of became a bit of a hermit, but I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I had to focus my knowledge into something, and I'd wanted to write a book for some years, so it all just made sense. And I talked a lot about alchemy in the past, and ultimately, I wanted to teach people about alchemy because it's like this ancient science that is out there, and I wanted to talk about it, but I found it was a difficult subject to talk about because people are literally indoctrinated with modern science, which is a set of theories that are opposed to every principle of alchemy. And it took me some years to realize this, but that like every sort of modern theory of the last few hundred years of science is directly opposed to one of the key principles of alchemy. And so I started to get the idea that actually it seems like it's just propped up in order to hide alchemy. It's like they're actually hiding alchemy with this modern science. And so that was sort of the basis of the book. And so it's very much written in two parts. So the first part looks at all the criticisms of all the modern scientific theories. And then in the second part, it reveals the ancient science of alchemy, and really with the aim of showing people that there is a natural science which is universal and common to all ancient cultures. And it doesn't require actually any theories at all. It's completely tied up with practical science. It's not a theoretical science. It's theory and practice together as one. So I wanted to reveal the alchemy, but also before I could do that, I had to, criticize and rebuke the modern science. So that's really the essence of the book, a book of two halves, as it were.
You were formerly trained in modern quote science too. So you talk about it in the book, but can you share what led you to discover alchemy in the first place and sort of cast aside all you were indoctrinated with?
Yeah, so, well, after coming out of university with a PhD in theoretical nuclear physics,
What does that,
um,
even
you
just
know,
saying theoretical nuclear physics, how does that sound coming out of your mouth at this point?
well, I mean, it's, I went to university, perfectly innocent, looking to learn about the world.
Yeah.
And I got caught up in the excitement of this new physics, as they call it, the new physics of the 20th century, which is things like quantum mechanics and relativity and so on. So I got caught up into that. And of course, there was lots of that at university as well. So it seemed like this was the future. This was, so I threw myself into it and, took it as far as I could, which is ultimately to PhD level, which I graduated at the age of 25. So, 25, I'd been in education my whole entire life at this point. And then I come out expecting, there's going to be all these opportunities, but, actually finding meaningful work that actually used the knowledge that I'd gained at university was, impossible. I mean, I was unemployed for 6 months, applying for jobs all over the place, all these weird places. But it seemed like I was either overqualified or underqualified, or just there was just no real use for the stuff I'd been learning.
What typical
Uh,
lines of work do people that are theoretical nuclear physicists end up in?
well, I would say the most common one is banking,
That's
which I was
interesting.
determined not to get into because it's frightfully boring for me. But I ended up getting into IT consulting and ended up consulting for banks anyway. So, I sort of ended up in banking
He tried
anyway.
to avoid banking, but still ended up working in banking somehow.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, the banking sector is the largest employer of PhD physicists, you know.
That is so
Uh,
interesting. I wonder why that is.
yeah. So I had a job for 5 years, but the whole time I was just like dreaming of being an independent artist. I'd been sort of a hobbyist in music and electronic music and DJ for a long time, and sensed an opportunity to like go professional with that. Making music on my computer at home in my studio. And in 2010, that's what I did. I quit my job. I'm like, right, let's go all in with music. I'm just going to work from home. I'm going to make music, do gigs, and just see where it takes me. And I did that, 10 years solid. It was like international touring and, made over 100 tunes. But while I was doing that, I was also researching and reading and studying. But in my public life, I was a musician entertainer. But at home, I was still researching and reading and trying to get to the bottom of fundamental science. And so this led me down a path of shamanism. So shamanism was very alluring to me because the stories you hear, the healing, the miraculous healings that people have, the visions that people see, and all this. This was very alluring and intriguing to me, and I kind of threw myself into that and took part in a number of medicine ceremonies in Central America and in the UK. And they were a real game changer. It took me out of my sort of materialistic programming and showed me this inner world and this world, this mysterious spiritual world, of which I just couldn't explain at all with the science I'd been taught. I couldn't just put in terms like what was actually happening in these shamanic experiences. And this ultimately led me to alchemy. At the beginning of these ceremonies, they'll be talking about the fire and the earth and the air and the water and things like this. So I got a sense that there was this natural science that these people practice, and I was kind of coming at it from this like super theoretical, like quantum point of view, and trying to explain it with that. But
a lot of people still do that, by the way, and I tend to think that that's more of the new age sect of the freedom/consciousness, whatever this overlapping community is. Those are the people that attribute it to some sort of quantum particle theoretical phenomena.
Yeah, well, that's it, because we have these theories installed in our brain, and then we have an experience, and then we feel we have to then interpret the experience through the theoretical models we've been given. But when you've been trying to do that for years or decades, and the models never actually seem to work effectively at explaining anything, you start to question it more and more. And so I guess I had a number of awakenings, you could call it, where I realized that a big part of my education was just wrong or false, or just like a new idea which had been pushed into me, but which ancient peoples and people who live a natural life don't need these ideas, they can't use them, and I couldn't find any real place where they were being used. Um, with theoretical physics, there's got to be like an application of it, to make it real. It's like if there's no application, then it's not real. So with something like quantum physics, there's only a handful of applications they claim for quantum physics. And what I found is when I looked into those, they weren't actually applications of quantum physics. They were applications of engineering. And it was like the quantum physics theorists had like retroactively taken credit for the invention as if it was born out of the minds of quantum physicists, but actually it was born from the work of engineers and technicians. And it's just like the theorists have tried to explain it and then claim credit for it in retrospect. And I found that with all of the alleged applications of quantum physics. And so that was just with quantum physics, but in the book, I talk about 5 main theories that are the foundation of all modern theories. And it's, atomism, gravity, heliocentrism, evolution, and the germ theory. And of course, I learned all about the germ theory through people like yourself and Dr. Tom Cowan and Andrew Kaufman. I knew nothing about germ theory prior to 2020. But in some ways, like what happened there just kind of revealed the whole system of modern scientific thought, because like everyone, even if they weren't biologists or germ theorists or doctors, like they got on board with all that as well. It's like the whole system seemed to act as one mind. So it was very revealing. And so with the book, I thought I want to tie it all together. I want to, I don't want to just write a book about physics or, one specific area. I want to tie together all the modern science and the ancient alchemy, like all together in one book. And I think that's important because a lot of people are trapped in their own fields of specialty. There's like a filter bubble type effect where someone can be like really knowledgeable within this like one area, but then still have no idea of, what else is going on outside of them. And so I knew I had nothing new to say about germ theory or nothing new to say even about flat earth or whatever. It's like loads of people have been saying this stuff for years, but I thought it was just worth tying it all together, all the criticisms against all the modern theories, and then showing that actually there's an ancient science that works perfectly well, so you don't actually need any of that stuff. That was the aim anyway.
Did an incredible job. I'd like to follow the thread as you laid it out in the book, actually. One of the things that you mentioned towards the beginning is how there's a major difference between classical physics and quantum slash theoretical physics, but they're sort of lumped into one category with this sort of golden calf worshiping allure that whole branch of quote science knows what it's talking about. They're the authority figures. They've figured out how reality works. When really, because they've lumped it in, again, classical physics is watching objects in motion and then coming up with, ways to explain cause and effect of watching objects in motion, basically observing something happening and then trying to figure out the cause of that naturally occurring phenomenon. But then you have quantum and theoretical physics, which are lumped in with that very cleverly. And I think you do a really good job at the beginning of the book, sort of delineating the difference between the two and showing how we've been tricked.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I was at uni, they would talk about pure science, as in, pure science would be science which has no application, and then applied science, which would be the one, the type of science that leads to applications and products and so on. And albeit I thought, there's nothing wrong with pure science. I mean, we need thinkers, right? We need people to think, but it's like, if there's all these people just thinking and it's not actually like translating to anything beneficial for, real people or for the world, then, I think we kind of have a problem there. It's like you've got all these like people who they want to do good work. They have inquisitive minds. They're learned. It's like they want to work, but they're all being like kind of kettled together into this, academic. It's like an insular, like limited hangout where they can all just talk about whatever it is they're theorizing about without any accountability for like, well, have you actually made anything yet? Have you actually created any benefits for humanity? And so it turns out the real difference between theoretical work and practical work is that, practical work, you can do it and produce a thing, but with theoretical work, you have to believe it. You have to believe it because it's like permeates everything. It's in all of it's in physics, chemistry, and biology. It's in the media. It's, assumed true. Like these theories are just assumed true by all reasonable people of society, right? And we're told that it was all agreed upon long ago by a consensus, and they figured it out. But the more you look at these things and you criticize them, they just begin to crumble under scrutiny. And of course, you find the people who are pushing these ideas never really respond to criticism. They just pretend it's not there, or they use ad hominem attacks, just smear people and block people and just carry on. And, we see that now, like with the whole, pandemic shenanigans, like all the evidence we've seen in the last 4 years, it still hasn't changed the course of academia or government or stuff. They just carry on the same regardless. So, I just felt there's like something really wrong here, and so I wanted to address that in the book.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job. And I think that when we're talking about observing a naturally occurring phenomenon and trying to figure out what is the cause of that phenomenon, that
Mm-hmm.
that sort of aspect of what we call science is the true science. And then, well, alchemy is the true science, and we'll get to that. But in terms of modernity, setting aside the truth about alchemy, that's like classical physics is modern science. Like that's, I mean, that is the proper science rather. And
Yeah.
theoretical and quantum physics leaves us up for just having to trust mathematical models, which is another thing as well, that math itself is just a language that can be used to explain things that have been observed and found to be true, but also
Mhm.
be explained to, be used to explain things that are completely untrue or have never been proven to be true. And that's where it's like, I think you use the quotes from Michio Kaku. I think that's how you pronounce his name, several of them. And then I know Tesla was quoted saying something similar, that modern quote science isn't doing science at all. They're calling what they're doing science, but it's actually just using mathematical modeling.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say with classical physics, isn't even necessarily about cause or causality. It's just about relationships between quantities, and that's why it works so well. It's like, uh, if you put something in the bath, then the level changes in proportional to the volume, right? It's like, things like that. It's you look at one, um like an independent variable and how it's affected by other changes that you make, and then you get a mathematical relationship between them, and then that lets you then understand and work with the system, and make products, and make designs from it. But it's not necessarily answering the question of what causes things to be like this. Um, in the days before science, it would just be, well, it's God, right? God made it that way. That's the cause, right? But of course, science is a godless creed, so it has to explain everything without invoking a creator or anything like that. And so in doing that, there seems to be this race to the bottom, right? Where it's like you have to explain the smaller and smaller, levels, until they've basically gone down to a level where no one can access, no one can see or measure.
And that's
And
atomism.
there's something, yeah, that's the atomism. So it just goes, I mean, we're talking like 10 to the minus 15 meters, or like a million times smaller than a nanometer. Um, and then they're saying that basically at that level of reality, there is this like untapped power source, which, they can like unlock with special knowledge and special technology and all that. They can unlock this awesome power, and it has the potential to destroy worlds and everything. And yeah, so that is highly questionable, because the only proof of that so-called theory are nuclear bombs. But they're just regular bombs. When you really get down to it, so there's no justification for putting the word nuclear in front of it. Really, when you get down to it, it's like a it just puffs it up, makes it seem like it's more special than just a regular explosive. But I think you've talked about this before, but yeah, when you really start picking it apart and looking at it, there's no evidence that the bombs were actually nuclear. And then your applications of nuclear physics then just drop.
Right.
It's like the bomb was the only proof we had.
Before we get into atomism, gravity, heliocentrism, evolution, and germ theory, I want to touch on one more thing, because this is something that I've been trying to articulate, that you articulate so well in the book, the issues with quantum physics and in referring to everything. You even see these trends in the sort of new age leaning health freedom space to call everything that we see quantum entanglement, quantum phenomena. We have quantum healing devices. Like, that word always bothered me, because it seems to be a godless way of trying to explain these mysterious aspects of reality that can be easily explained when you bring back in the context of ether.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
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 So can
I
you
mean,
touch on, like, from your perspective, the issues with quantum, because we see that word thrown around so much in this space, and I get what people are attempting to explain or trying to say when they use the word quantum, but it's always bothered me, and you explain it so well in the book, the problems with quantum.
yeah. Well, it's like, well, once you accept quantum, is then everything is quantum, right? Because it's like we're made from atoms, and atoms are quantum. So everything's quantum. I'm quantum. You know, it's just like you can say anything is quantum once you accept that we're made from quantum particles. So, but what do you even mean when you say something is quantum? You know, in quantum physics, it refers to essentially the ability of a particle to like jump, you know, from one point in space to another without going through the space in between, like a
Okay.
quantum leap. And you know, so you know that's essentially what they're saying, is that these particles are able to, like, you know, move in and out of reality and like make little like leaps and jumps, all of course while spinning and wobbling and orbiting around each other, and you know, phasing in and out of reality, or whatever it is they claim that it does now. um, but you know, ultimately the theory of atoms is directly opposed to the theory of ether, because ether says there is a fabric, you know, that there's a fabric in the space which is all connected, like water or like air, where you know everything is connected, everything is as one, and it's all happening inside of that.
Yeah.
But the atomism sort of flips that around and says, no, everything's made from little hard balls which are separate. They're all separate from each other. In fact, they can't touch each other. You know, that they're these little hard balls, and they're all separated in space. So it's a completely opposite worldview from one in which everything is connected to one in which everything is
Right.
separate. And this leads to materialistic, you know, ideologies. You know, materialism, and you know, this led to gravity and all these other things.
I mean, the perfect example of that over the last 4 years is trying to explain what's going on by coming up with a theoretical, and it's a totally theoretical particle that has never been proven to exist.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah,
virus. That a virus is a theoretical particle that has never actually been demonstrated to exist. When you bring back in the context of ether and the human biofield and just the ability to be indoctrinated in mass and us playing out that in mass through psychosomatics and things like this, which are, I would say, well established phenomena, it all makes so much more sense than trying to explain it via this totally theoretical particle. And that's where I think atomism leads us wrong, is that it's trying to explain literally every facet of reality with some sort of theoretical particle. Another example with respect to gravity, which can be explained with density, buoyancy, and just electromagnetism, is they're trying to say that, oh, well, we don't know the cause, but our mathematical models indicate that there's likely this particle called a graviton that is what's causing this phenomenon to happen. And it's all rooted in materialism, looking for particles, looking for the smallest units to explain something that can be more easily explained when you just cast all that nonsense aside and bring back in ether and the elements.
yes, yeah. Yeah, so quantum physics specifically sort of hides the ether, but also hides two other things: transmutation of metals and free energy. You know, so these are like three things when you go to physics class, you get told, you know, in no uncertain terms. It's like there's no such thing as ether. But you can't transmute metals, or you know, officially they say that it's possible with particle accelerators, but requiring so much energy and cost as to be not worth doing. And then, of course, they tell you there's no such thing as free energy as well. And you know, uh, these things are, you know, not true. Energy is all around us, infinite, abundant, will never run out. But you know, you're immediately put into this sort of scarcity, materialistic indoctrination through the physics education, and it extends into chemistry and into biology as well. And I mean, that's how, to be honest, that's how I found the virus theory so kind of easy to debunk. I mean, I read the Stefan Lanka paper in 2020, and it just it wasn't hard for me to think, well, this is theoretical because, like you say, a virus is a particle. It's actually a molecule made from atoms. And so I was just like, oh, here we go. But yeah, and then seeing, of course, you guys showing that, actually looking at it from, I was looking at it from the quantum side, if you like, and then there's all these people looking at it from the top down through the microscopes, and like, where is the actual substance, of virus? There is no substance. And so, yeah, so that was, if you like, a virus is an application of quantum theory as well, because how could you postulate such a thing existing if you didn't also believe in atoms and molecules and all this other stuff as well? So yeah, it seemed like virus is almost like the cherry on top of this, like, hundreds of years of new science. Yeah.
Yeah, and we already touched on nuclear a little bit too. That's kind of where this leads, this materialistic approach, and then the big psyop, I would say, in atomism aside. And I know you go to germ theory as well, but it ties into atomism. It really does, because it's, again, when it comes to the virus element of germ theory, that is a theoretical particle that you could then reattach to atomism. But then the other big thing, just aside from the general materialistic, obsessed sentiments in the scientific community, would be nuclear bombs, which you've already discussed, which, I mean, that is so unbelievably absurd. I think there are enough people debunking that at this point. When you look at, there's no radiation fallout in several of these places that were alleged to have nuclear bombs blasted. You look at that, there's the video footage, the alleged video footage of nuclear bombs exploding. The cameras somehow totally survived. They find glitches in the cameras where there was a car in the frame and then no longer in the frame. I mean, I think it's all a scare tactic, just like the virus is, to keep us afraid of some perpetual thing that's never going to happen. And that's not to say they can't, when it comes to the germ theory or things like this, create or even use frequencies or create chemicals that can have an effect of multiple people getting sick in the same space to create the appearance of germs passing, just like with nuclear bombs. They can just use real fucking bombs that cause massive explosions that cause damage. But the point is, yeah, you get what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, big fucking bombs. Yeah, and it's like with quantum computers as well. I make that point as well. It's like you can actually make a computer as powerful as you want using parallel processing. But we keep being sold this idea that there's a quantum computing is on the horizon, and once that comes out, oh, nobody's safe. You're gonna get all your passwords are gonna get stolen, all your money and everything. The quantum computer will just be able to solve all the encryption. And I've been following quantum computers since 1996, dude. I mean, it's nearly 30 years. Like, nothing has happened. Like, it's pure smoke and mirrors. And it's a similar thing with the bomb. So yeah, I mean, there's, with each of these theories, there is a bogeyman or a scare factor attached to each of them. Of course, from atoms, we get the atom bomb. From gravity, we get things like black holes. And from heliocentrism, we get, space aliens and asteroids, which are new enemies, that people didn't believe in or worry about long ago, but which they do now because they believe in heliocentrism. And then, of course, from evolution, you get viruses, right? It's like they're said to evolve out of the goo. And, the virus is like the sort of bogeyman incarnate. It's like a particle that makes you sick. Again, it's like putting all the power into the smallest scale possible. It's like, oh, it's not, it's not you making you sick. It's not, the government. It's not the, it's this tiny little thing that you can't even see. That's like, a smaller than, a billionth of the width of a human hair or something like this. It just puts all the power so far away and so low level that you got sort of almost no choice but to trust the experts, do you? I mean, because you can't see the vibe.
Yeah. And you could say from evolution, you also get, quote, bad genetics and all these, quote, genetic diseases, when it's not genetic diseases. It's literally just that we're being poisoned. And that's what's causing these issues. Like they're saying obesity is a genetic thing. Heart disease is a genetic thing. I don't think that's true at all. that it's just
Yeah.
perpetual generations of people being poisoned or buying into or making choices to be poisoned themselves by the choices they make in their own lives.
Yeah. So the germ theory actually hides knowledge of healing.
Yeah.
Because you can't, like, when you have a virus, that you can't heal it, right? It's like healing doesn't even make sense in the virus theory, right? It's like you have to kill the virus. So it's like, so yeah, we talked about this, but yeah, it's like war. It's a war mentality. It's like kill the disease rather than heal the patient.
Right.
And so it was always about healing. Alchemy is about healing. True medicine is about healing, and the virus theory takes that away and makes it all about war.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I want to
there's a
touch on
Sorry, go
gravity
on.
and heliocentrism though, like a lot. I think I've touched on the germ theory like every other episode in this podcast. So the ones that I want to touch on quite a bit are gravity and heliocentrism. So do you think that was, for you being a theoretical nuclear physicist, something that was hard for you to wrap your head, no pun intended, wrap your head around initially?
Yeah, I mean, it was about 2016. I started looking at the flat Earth stuff, like the Eric Dubé stuff, and Dave Weiss, a lot of those guys. There was a lot of other people around at that time that aren't around anymore. But it didn't take that long, actually. My mind had been opened to a lot of things at that point. I was living in Hawaii, and so I just started taking it on and thinking about it, talking about it with people, and just trying things out. And eventually, came to the conclusion that I don't live on a giant spinning ball flying through outer space. But then it took me, I'd say, probably spent about 2 years after having that realization. I spent about 2 years like trying to check, thinking I must be wrong. There must be there must be a test out there that proves it, or you're checking the news every day, make sure something, some new information didn't come to light that changed it. So I was sure, but I was also unsure, because it was like such a big thing. It was just like, and then you see how people react to it, how upset people get if you start questioning gravity. And you realize, wow, it's because gravity is really like the glue. That we've been told that the gravity is the glue that holds the entire universe together. So if you don't believe in gravity, then nothing could exist at all. That's kind of the way people see it. So it's like a linchpin. But gravity is a made-up equation. So there's four forces in physics. They always talk about four fundamental forces, or the standard model. And they say there's the force of gravity, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and the electromagnetic force. Now, the electromagnetic force we know is real. It works perfectly well. We can build things with it. But the other three are actually made-up equations. They're contrived. They're not the result of measuring and like making mathematical relationships like with classical physics. They're actually like hypothesized equations, which they then sort of make to fit the observation. They massage it to fit the observation by changing the values of constants and things like this. So
in this, with respect to gravity, let's say, are we talking about negative 9.8 meters per second squared?
No, I'm talking about the F equals.
That's what I thought. Okay, because
M1 M2 over R squared. Yeah,
because that you could attribute to classical physics, but again, that's an effect. That's not proof of cause. We're pointing at an effect, and then they just attribute a theoretical cause or come up with this absurd equation that has never been demonstrated in reality.
Yeah. I mean, that's a problem, honestly, that gravity is considered as classical physics. And
would you say that's incorrect? Well, I mean, like not gravity, but the equation negative 9.8, just literally observing things falling to the ground. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, I mean, like the rate at which things fall, measuring the rate at which things fall, that's classical physics. But postulating the existence of a force called gravity as the cause of things falling,
right?
That's not, that's sophistry. Basically, you're getting into like new territories there. You're postulating forces and particles that no one's ever seen. And the thing with gravity, it's so unbelievably weak that is just, again, like with the small particles, it's so weak and small as to be impossible for anyone to sort of measure effectively. Again, I'm not talking about the rate at which something falls, but actually like to measure the actual force of gravity. And there was only one experiment that did it. It was the Cavendish experiment that they always cite from like 1797. And they always tell you it's like a really, really hard experiment to reproduce, even though it was done 300 years ago. Oh, I still can't do it. It's just so hard. The apparatus is so sensitive. It's like, anything could be actually causing the readings. And so, yeah, it is a bit like that with gravity. There's a new system they have called LIGO, which is supposed to measure gravitational waves. But when you look at just how sensitive this is, it's ridiculous. Anything could be causing the readings, because they will say it was a supernova. The supernova flashed a million light years away and caused, a little blip on a graph on their machine. It's just not. It's not convincing enough. It's too easy to just pick it apart,
Yeah.
But I think most people, they just accept it, right? Because there's this idolatry, there's this kind of idol factor in science, where it's just like, oh, the mighty scientists have, achieved a result. There's not enough people actually just, holding it to account and picking it apart. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Dave Weiss, speaking of electromagnetism, Dave Weiss, when I interviewed him, he showed this quote. I don't remember who it came from, but by their own admissions, the force or the power of electromagnetism is like 10 to the 30th times more powerful than what they claim the force of gravity is. And that's by their own admission. I think that speaks volumes, because it's really, they're pointing to, okay, this is more sufficient in addition to density and buoyancy to explain this phenomenon than this theoretical thing, this force that we call gravity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Density and buoyancy and electromagnetism are enough to like make things move up or down, without having to invoke this like super weak, fictitious force that's like, kind of holding everything together. So yeah, like every other force in nature is able to overcome gravity by, masses, orders of magnitude. So yeah, it's just, but it's like, it has to be there. They've, because the architects of gravity, which is Newton, Einstein, and Hawking. I would challenge anyone to come up with any other names they can associate with gravity. Right? They can. It's like these, and they're held up as the pinnacle of, intellectual achievement. These are the smartest men who ever lived, biggest achievement, in humanity and stuff. But you realize it's just, you can't even talk about gravity without mentioning their names. Like, you have to invoke them because it came from their minds, But you even have like situations where, so you can't, the Earth isn't moving, right? If you go by the evidence, there's no movement at all. You cannot measure any like spinning or moving through space. And people will say, oh, but Einstein said that. Einstein said there's no way to optically measure the movement of the Earth. As if they're saying, well, Einstein's right, but Einstein believed the Earth was moving. So
right. Well, and that's the
like,
thing, is there's already that presupposition there, and we just go with the presupposition because it's coming from an authority figure. So even he admitted that there's no way to measure it. I'm sure he was referring back to the Michelson-Morley experiment there, but there's no way to measure it, but then he's still presupposing that it moves. And because he's an authority, we just say, okay, he knows better, so let's go with that. And the scientific consensus says this.
And how can you be sure that it's moving if there's no way to measure that it's moving? The only way is to believe in the theory.
Right.
That's it. And so that's why these theorists are held up, in such high regard. But as I say, like every theory has a philosophy attached to it as well. And so with gravity, because it's all about the power of matter to attract more matter. Of course, matter is like money, right? It's like, it's very, it's a very materialistic theory, but it transmuted into relativity. So Einstein changed the theory of gravity into the theory of relativity. But relativity is, at its core, it's about moral relativism. It's relativity is not just a theory about physics, it's a theory about truth. It's a theory that says that truth is not absolute, that there's no reference frame in the universe that is the true measure of what's going on, that actually everything is relative, including truth, including morality. So, with moral relativism, the idea is that there is no objective right and wrong. There is only, what I say is right for me. What you say is right for you. Now, clearly, there is some relativity between, different experiences from people to people, but, it's quite a solid thing in, religion and all that, there is like a moral sort of standard in the universe. And, so relativity really attacks that as well, so we have each of these theories, they have a corresponding philosophy where it's like, even if you don't understand the theory, just as long as you believe it, you kind of adopt this attitude towards life, based on the theory. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where people come up with, quote, my truth. Like what they're talking about when they say my truth, they're trying to imply that truth is relative, when the reality is what they're trying to point to but failing to point to is that they're having a subjective experience of objective reality. And that's a completely different thing than saying my truth, which means, oh, reality is all relative. No, reality is reality, and you have your own subjective experience of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, these ideas are actually really toxic to like a nation or society. And I mean, in my view, like when I look over the history of the 20th century, having that they've been teaching these theories to school children, university people for, generations now. And I see that it's had an absolutely detrimental effect on society as a whole. Maybe everyone can't see that. It's just my perspective. But, all this stuff that we've been taught that has no application in the real world, the lack of skills of people in the West, when you look to like China and stuff like that, people are very, very skilled, right? It's like they're learning like practical stuff. But we're sitting about getting our heads filled with all this like atomic theory and relativity and, all of it. And we come out of our education with very few skills other than maybe, spreadsheets and computer programming or something like that,
Right. I mean, what you've laid out with atomism, gravity, heliocentrism, evolution, germ theory, that's like the basis for schooling right there. Like that is the school system in essence. And you're filling your head with nonsense that requires that you perpetually appeal to authority figures and just regurgitate what they're saying. And that's what leads you to becoming a mindless, obedient slave to them in order to make income in any way. And that hinders your creative capacity because you're turning to them for truth instead of, seeking within, so to speak, and also seeking these other things and the hidden truths that they're hiding from you so that you can get out of all that nonsense and actually have a fulfilled life in reality with things that are practical in reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I have to tell you, just at the weekend, I was reminded of a game they used to make us play at school, and I asked around a few people. They all remembered it, and I think they still do it today. And but I don't know how widespread it is. But the game was called Heads Down, Thumbs Up.
I remember the game.
Did they do it to you?
Yeah, we played it too. Yeah, absolutely. Like heads down, thumbs up, and then someone walks by and puts your thumb down.
Puts your thumbs down. Yeah. So I was just thinking of that and the symbolism of that, right? It's like heads down, don't look at the truth, and then thumbs up, affirm everything's okay, And then the teacher comes and puts the thumb down. It's almost like, well, it's only not okay until when the teacher puts your thumb down, right? Otherwise, everything's okay. And it just hit me like a like a sack of tatties, as we say here. It just really hit me that is like the conditioning, like summed up, and people in this country, it's like, everything's fine, but I won't look. I won't look at the truth. Everything's great. And that was what it was like, during the pandemonium and all that. It's just people pretending everything's fine but refusing to look at the truth. It just all summed up in that game, you know.
I want to touch on Michelson Morley real quick too. Is that
Yeah.
cool?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go there.
Thumbs up.
So because I think that the Michelson Morley experiments are, how do I put this? I think that those experiments had a more detrimental impact. I mean, it depends on how you look at it, right? But like their ideas that came about as a result of these experiments had a more detrimental impact. But when you look at the experiments themselves, they indicate something that is very positive. It's all based on how they interpreted it, where they presuppose that the Earth is moving, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd like to touch on that because you do briefly in the book.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, well, the idea is to, they have two lights or lasers, one which is like pointing in the direction that the Earth is allegedly moving through space, and the other laser is pointed in the direction perpendicular to that. And they reasoned that the light would move slower in the direction of movement of the planet because it was having to move through the ether because the planet's moving through the ether. So at that point, they were, they had the ether theory still in mind, but they also presupposed the Earth is moving. So they were taking both of that to the experiment. And then they're like, well, the light's definitely going to slow down because of the drag caused by moving through the ether. But they didn't measure that at all. And so you might think, well, okay, then they'd be like, okay, so the Earth isn't moving, but actually they went the other way and they said, I thought, well, there's no such thing as ether.
Right. Yeah. So and that's my point. It's all based on the presupposition that they had. What this is indicating is one or the other. And they had already sort of accepted at that point, and virtually all societies and civilizations who are looking into this stuff throughout history had accepted that the fact of ether. And now they cast aside ether, and it must mean that the Earth is moving because they already had the presupposition that the Earth is moving.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. So, I mean, I don't know Michelson and Morley personally. I don't know who they were, who was funding them, what were they, what was their agenda. But, that seems to be the story. It was like, they used the result of the experiment to discredit the ether rather than using it to discredit heliocentrism.
Right.
They may have been pressured into that. I don't know.
But relativity came out of that, though, right? Essentially, that was like the foundation for relativity, because that's where they started discussing how light and time dilate and bend in such a fashion, right?
Yeah, how you can basically be flying through the universe without feeling anything or noticing anything. It's like relativity allows for that, all the movement to be happening without any measurable effect of it, Yeah, I mean, relativity is a weird one, and in quantum physics, what they do is they sort of add relativity into the equations and things like that. But if you think your measurements in quantum physics are super small, like when you add relativity into it, it's like, again, a million times smaller. Like it doesn't really affect. You don't need to use it. It's one of those sciences that there really is no use for at all. But they will tout it as if it's the greatest, achievement of any human being in our entire history. But it's actually a very confusing theory and a very problematic worldview that results from it. Attack on truth, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
So I already did a whole episode on all the fallacies of the globe with Dave Weiss, so we'll set that aside. But one thing I would like to ask related to the globe, heliocentrism, and gravity is, as a theoretical nuclear physicist, coming from being indoctrinated to believe that, how is it, I don't even know how to frame this. How is it that people truly end up believing those things despite them not being demonstrated in reality?
Well, I mean, when you consider like what you're actually doing, as a theoretical physicist, what you're actually doing day to day, you're just solving equations, writing computer programs to run codes, produce graphs, yada yada, that kind of thing. So it's very all the work was very contained, as I say, it doesn't it's not really
Compartmentalized.
tested. Yeah, it's compartmentalized and it's
Yeah.
just not really tested to the sort of degree that um you can y- you'll get plenty of affirmation from like the other people around you, the other people who are working in the same field as you. They'll talk to you about it, they'll have something to say, they'll have some interest, but it's just, as I say, like a sort of limited hangout. And when you're in it, you don't realize that. It feels like super important. You're part of a club, you're all super smart, you're all doing this work or whatever. But when you come out of academia and you no longer really care about, you know, academic career or anything like that, you look at the world and you see, well, 20 years later, has any of this stuff actually led to anything? Anything that I can directly say this is a good thing happened as a result of the work that these theorists were doing, and there's nothing I can point to. Like everything I looked, it just like crumbled like ashes. The closer you get to it, it's like the further it gets away.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
I mean that makes sense. It's totally well said. And then for the people who say, as I once did, even as I was waking up to the live heliocentrism, why does this matter? And you cover all these things in the book where it's like, okay, they clearly matter. The Hindenburg disaster and airships, the implications for being able to travel that way, which I think that they stopped so that we couldn't discover the truth of both the North and the South, so to
Mhm.
speak.
Yeah.
And the implications of there being more than what they are telling us, and sort of free energy technologies are sort of wrapped into that, and you cover some of these things in the book. But I hadn't even heard of, I don't know how I hadn't, the Hindenburg disaster and airships I have heard of, but can we touch on why they no longer allow airships to be created and the implications of that relative to heliocentrism?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know really who was behind it, but what seemed to happen with that disaster, and I actually saw a video, like a colored video of it recently, and it was a very shocking sight, this huge thing like going up in flames. Um, and so this was used to shut down the whole like airship industry worldwide. As far as I know, I don't think there's any countries where they use airships anymore, unless it's just for a gimmick purpose, like the Goodyear blimp or whatever. Um, and yeah, when you think like then that was completely replaced by airplanes, and that's now the dominant method of travel. And airplanes suck, right? It's like as a well-traveled person as I am, like it's just gotten worse and worse. It's a horrible way to travel now. And of course, you can only go to designated areas on the map that have an airport. But with an airship, you can go anywhere. Just in any direction, just off you go. You can land anywhere. You can stop anywhere. And the idea that you would ban an entire mode of transport worldwide because of one accident is also totally absurd. You think about boats. How many boat accidents have
Totally.
there been? You wouldn't just ban all boats
Right, without going into any
worldwide.
conspiracies relative to the Titanic, like that was a big boat accident
Yeah,
that plenty of people died, and they didn't just ban all boats. How many boat wrecks have there
yeah.
been throughout history?
That's it. By the same logic, they'd be like, "That's it. We can't have things floating on the
Can't have
water. It's too
bicycles
dangerous.
anymore, cars, any
People
of them.
could drown."
Yeah, exactly. It's absurd.
uh, it's absurd. So yeah, I don't know who exactly was behind that, but yeah, the it seems that airships, they not only prove that Earth is like a plane and you can go anywhere, they also prove that gravity is not a thing. I mean, they're just hanging in the air, like these huge big things just hanging there. It's quite spectacular. The old footage of seeing them like flying over New York and everything. It's like it almost seems like you're looking in the future, but
Yeah.
you're looking in the past. So
How far
yeah,
back have you found images of these, or sorry, pictures of these airships?
I yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm just looking back to, it would have been the 30s. I think it was it 36 when Hindenburg.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a bunch of images and videos from that time of airships floating over New York and in Europe and stuff like that. But I haven't looked deeper than that, into history. But it
I
seems
just
like a
wonder if
technology.
that's like a technology that's pre Wright brothers for flying, and I would imagine so.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would imagine so. I don't know for sure, exactly what happened there, but it just seems like that would, you know, to because we can't fly to Antarctica, right? Because there's no airports, you know. And if you go on a boat, you'll get removed by military force. As soon as you get like past the 66 parallel, a bigger boat will just come along and tell you to leave. But if you had an airship, then you'd just be like, all right, let's
Right.
go. Just keep going until you like bump into the wall or whatever, whatever's
Whatever's
there.
there.
Is there
Yeah,
a wall?
whatever
I
it
don't
is.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
who knows?
Yeah, and it's with respect to Antarctica, I used to buy into the idea that they're hiding Antarctica from us and that all countries agree because they have alien technology there, alien technology from outer space. Did you
Mm.
ever think that at any point?
I've heard some stuff like that. Yeah, yeah. I've heard
That's what I
people
used to
say,
think, and now I don't think that
yeah,
whatsoever.
yeah. There's that old map. I forget what it's called now, but it's a huge map. You might have seen it. It's from hundreds of years ago, and it shows like flat Earth, the circle, like Gleason's map style. But on the Antarctica, there's like loads of like mythical beasts and stuff like drawn onto the map.
Oh,
Sort of suggesting that that this was a land of like mythical beasts and strange creatures and stuff. Which may be the case. I mean, if you think about it, does things do seem to get more wild and strange as you get further out from the center. I mean, just look at Australia. The wildlife in Australia is totally out of
that's
this
a
world.
good
It's like
point.
an alien
That's a really
planet,
good
man.
point.
And New Zealand is very strange things going on there as well. So yeah, you're even further out into Antarctica. I'm sure there may be strange things there which you could maybe call aliens, but I doubt they're from outer space.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting that terrestrial, that means of the earth. So if you think extra terrestrial, extra of the earth, maybe there are other types of beings that are in extra parts of the earth
Yeah,
rather
yeah,
than
I'm
from
totally
other
open,
quote planets.
totally open to that possibility. Yeah, yeah, that there's other lands or other creations even. Um, but yeah, just pure speculation at this point. Until we can actually go there and see what's going on. It feels like we're kind of like penned in, you know.
Yeah.
It's like on the Truman Show, right? It's like when he starts getting the thoughts that he wants to go, he want to go and travel or whatever. It's like then everything in the world starts conspiring to stop him. He sees like posters of like plane crashes and things like that. It's just like everything all
A
around
little
him, just
weird.
like trying to put you off going there. And it's like that for us as well.
I
Like
mean, it quite
you
literally
try
is
to
like
go
with
there.
the Hindenburg disaster, airships, like, oh, like people are wanting to travel, go other places. So let's cut off this mode of travel, then make them only use these accepted ones that we have control over.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, it reeks. The whole thing just reeks of conspiracy and control. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So we've already talked atomism, gravity, heliocentrism. I've covered germ theory on plenty of other episodes. Evolution. The last question I have on evolution, then I want to get into alchemy and sort of discuss how all of these sort of dogmatic scientism based approaches are hiding alchemy from the masses, the true science, the true art. um. So I don't buy into evolution whatsoever, but some people will say that, well, what if evolution did occur, the Big Bang did occur, but it was guided by God. God helped guide that process of evolution. Because like I totally understand the the people who buy into evolution overwhelmingly are atheist, maybe agnostic, but most likely atheist, right? And it's a total godless paradigm. But there is this like middle ground of people who think that evolution is real. It happened. The Big Bang happened. I laugh even when I say that now, but that it was guided by God. What are your thoughts on that?
well, what I'd say about evolution is that someone I know recently said to me that reincarnation is the true evolution. And that might seem a bit strange, but it made a lot of sense to me, because there is change that happens from generation to generation. It's like, consciousness is evolving, like spirit is evolving, like things are changing. But when we talk about evolution theory, we mean the transmutation of animals, from goo to you via the zoo. That's what we're talking about. It started with simple life forms, and then they somehow wiggled themselves into bigger and bigger and more, clever life forms, until getting all the way up to humans. And that's not supported really by even the fossil record or things like that, all the missing in between species and this kind of thing. But so I would say it's there still is an evolution of consciousness which is happening through us, but it's not an evolution of life from basic slime up to human beings. I wouldn't say that at all, because it actually hides creation and creativity. And that's how the big debate that was in the 90s, it was evolution versus creationism or intelligent design. And so evolution actually challenges the whole idea of creation, or the whole idea of creativity, or the whole idea of intelligence being a property of the universe itself. Well, it's how can I have intelligence? How can I create if the universe isn't intelligent? If the universe can't create? It's as an artist, I made all this music. I imagine a scientist in the future found the music and tried to explain it with evolution, that this music just happened to come about through the random interaction of frequencies and all this. It's just absurd. It completely nullifies the intelligence and the creativity that's involved. And so it was really as I got more into being an artist that I started to get more of an issue with evolution, because I realized it's a direct assault on the creative process. The actual concept of creation is under threat from evolution. That we all just we're all just bumbling atoms, just using trial and error to feel our way through things, rather than this this intelligent spirit with creative abilities, which I believe in wholeheartedly. So I think that's the crux of it there. Without even getting into the science of it and all that, it's really a philosophy which is opposed to creation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my main issue with it.
If you're enjoying this episode, please consider sharing it with at least one friend or family member who you think could benefit from hearing it. You help us grow and reach more people by sharing it with those around you. Also, be sure to head to the show notes to check out our membership offerings, membership marketplace, and more. In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. Shilajit is one of the world's most popular superfoods. It's loaded with over 40 trace minerals, fulvic and humic acids, antioxidants, and more. It's a resin or tar-like substance that seeps out of the rocks of the Himalayas at extremely high altitudes, formed from centuries worth of decomposing plant matter and microbial activity, distilled by pure rainwater and pressurized by tons of mountainous rock. In a way, you could say it's kind of like the lifeblood of the earth itself, and we can use it to enhance our daily lives by absorbing its power into our body cells. However, if you've tried Shilajit in the past, you know it's true when I say it does not taste good, and that almost seems like an understatement. Some people say it's like licking an old used ashtray, and some people get a little more descriptive than that. Let your imagination run wild. It's pretty bad. But one thing is for certain. I've tried tons of Shilajit products, and no one has ever been able to cover the flavor, let alone make it taste good, until now. My friends at Organifi just released these new Shilajit gummies, and they actually taste good. They deliver 250 milligrams per serving of pure Himalayan Shilajit. Shilajit's benefits include supporting energy production, healthy hormone levels, performance and recovery, promoting collagen synthesis and heart health, increasing cellular energy, and decreasing fatigue. Shilajit has become super trendy in the superfoods and holistic health world for obvious reasons, and people have long been desperate for a solution to the flavor problem. That's why in the few months since Organifi released these, they've already sold out several times. Visit Organifi.com/TWF. That's ORGANIFI.com/TWF, or just head to the show notes. Take a look at their whole collection, and when you go to check out, use promo code TWF. That code is going to give you a 20% discount on all of their products, and they have a lot of amazing products other than their Shilajit gummies. Find out how these superfoods can help you on your health journey today with Organifi. Especially when we realize that we are imbued with the essence of the creator, we also have a co-creative capacity. It's a much more beautiful approach to life. Yeah. That's a whole thread we could pull on, but I want to get into alchemy instead. Alchemy relates directly to this, by the way. But
Yeah.
So I guess as a general starting point, how have all of those scientism-based paradigms hidden alchemy from the masses?
Well, we talked about how, in alchemy, as I say, everything's based on ether, but in science it's based on atoms. But then from the ether, so the ether sort of gives birth to the four elements: fire, earth, air, and water. And really, you've
said in the book that air and ether are one and the same. Is it kind of a both and that everything comes from ether, but the four other elements come from ether, but ether and air are kind of one and the same? Because I've always considered them five, and in the book you say that they're four.
Well, yeah, I realized that all the descriptions I've read about ether, actually it's described to be like an air-like substance, but very, very fine. It's like the finest grade of air, or the highest
hydrogen.
Air. So
hydrogen is actually ether.
Yeah. So yeah, but technically all the elements are ether. You could say water is the wetness of the ether, or earth is the dryness of the ether. It's like the ether has all these different properties that manifest in these four states, like earth, air, fire, and water, which is like liquid, solid, gas, and fire or plasma. So when you look to the world, when I look to the world, I see that everything is fire, earth, air, and water. Literally everything. If it's dry and solid, it's earth. If it's wet and watery, it's water. If it's dry and airy, it's air, and so on, gas and everything. And then there's fire or light, which is the only element which is able to penetrate all the others. So fire is able to penetrate and purify the air. Fire purifies water. Fire purifies earth. Fire is vibration, and it's able to go through and penetrate all the other elements. And so once you start seeing the world in that way, everything comes into focus, and the elements mix in life. Just like within us, we have bones and teeth. We have dry earth in us, but we also have blood. We also have tears and sweat and semen. We have water. We breathe the air, and we also have body heat, the fire. We have our willpower, our voice, vibration, again, fire. So everything can be explained in terms of the four elements. Now, by saying everything is electrons, protons, and neutrons, uh, you know, like they do in science, they're essentially hiding the fact that everything is made from the four elements, and now you have to try and wrestle with the fact that everything is made from these electrons, protons, and neutrons that you can't see or measure and stuff. So they hide the ether, they hide the elements, and then a big part of alchemy is the transmutation of metal. A lot of alchemists were metallurgists. They were making metals for all kinds of applications. And making metal involves, it's like making soup, right? It's like you heat up the metal, you turn it to liquid, you blend it, you add more heat, you purify it, and they were making all kinds of different metals. But through science, then we're taught that you can't do that. Like the metals grow inside the earth, and you can't change one metal into another. They just are, because they're all made from one specific type of atom. And so you could only change a metal if you can change the atoms.
Yeah.
And the only way to change the atoms is using particle accelerators that cost billions of pounds to run. So that means that basically nobody can do it. No normal person can do it, or whatever. So, but prior to like the 1850s or so, like everyone knew you could transmute metals. It was like not, it wasn't this like theoretical thing. It was occulted. So there's that, and then there's the whole thing with healing, the elixir of life, the philosopher's stone. And alchemy was all about healing and medicine, really, as well as making stuff. But the highest application of alchemy is the healing people. And the elixir of life was believed to be the ultimate medicine, right? It was like cure all disease and extend life in a natural way. And that's been hidden as well now by germ theory and viruses and all this that make it so that people don't even think about healing anymore. It's all about medications and surgeries and killing the disease and all this kind of stuff. So the whole healing aspect of alchemy is hidden as well. And to say through the evolution, it also hides the creativity. And with heliocentrism, it hides just the nature of the realm, which is geocentric. Most people know that it was like geocentric long ago, and then it was changed to heliocentric in the 1500s. So alchemy is a geocentric science as well. So like you see, so it's like every one of these theories is like directly opposed to what alchemy is saying. But the proof is in the pudding, and the fact is you can use alchemy to make anything, but you can't use electrons, protons, and neutrons to make anything. You just can't.
That's what you lay on the book too, and I'd never thought of this before, that electrons, protons, and neutrons are being used to occult salt, sulfur, and mercury.
Yes, yeah. So that's the next level of alchemy. It gets a bit more subtle when you get into
Can I pull up a chart? Because I think that you have this. This is one of the things from your book. I hope you don't care that I took a screenshot of something in your book, but
no, please. Yes, the Tetractys.
Yeah.
So this is like the ABC of alchemy, right? So the numbers 1 to 4, basically from the top down, and each of the numbers 1 to 4, they're like the roots of all knowledge, or the root of all numbers. And because all knowledge is symbolic, and all symbols can be reduced to numbers, and the numbers 1 to 4 are basically the root of the whole number series, and they each have symbolic qualities attached to them. So the number 1 is associated with oneness, the universe, the all, the God, or what they call the monad, but also the ether, right? This is the one singular ether of which we're all a part of. And then from the 1 you get the 2, and 2 is about gender, and this is masculine and feminine, and this is represented by the sun and the moon. So on the right there, the circle with the dot in the middle is the sun, and then the moon, obviously the crescent moon shape. And then from there, it gets into the 3 principles. So those symbols there are, from left to right, it's salt, mercury, and sulfur. Now, remember, the first split is into 2 genders. So on the left side, we actually have the female aspect. So earth and water are said to be feminine, and air and fire are said to be masculine. The sun is said to be masculine, the moon feminine. So when you come down from the sun there, you get sulfur, which is like the sun's energy in matter. So sulfur is yellow, it's the color of gold, and it has this like energy inside of it. You know, sulfur is used in explosives and corrosives and, you know, digestion and all this kind of thing. So sulfur is like a masculine energy. And then on the left side, you have salt. Salt, because it's earth, it's dry earth, and earth is feminine. It's on the feminine side. And then right in the middle there is Mercury. Now, Mercury is said to be gender balanced. It has it's a balance of opposing qualities, not just masculine and feminine, but you know, all other properties as well. Like it's a liquid, but it's also dry. You know, which is a strange one. You know, they call Mercury the water that doesn't wet the hands. So Mercury is this kind of paradox that has all these like opposing qualities united within itself. And then those three are called the three principles or the three primes, or the tria prima. And then from there we get the elements. So the two downward pointing triangles, that's earth and water. And they're downward pointing triangle because they move down. Like earth and water always move downward toward the ground, whereas fire and air are upward pointing triangles because they move up. And you know, they don't only, that's not only the way they move, but it's also like where they are in our natural experience of life, right? It's like the earth and the water is beneath us, and the fire, being the sun and the stars and so on, and the air is above us in the sky. And we also have the downward triangle represents the womb, and the upward triangle represents the phallus. And this is because the sky with the fire and the air is father sky. That's what it's known as, like universally in tribal cultures and so on. It's like father sky, mother earth.
Yeah.
So the earth and the water is our mother, the fire and the air is our father. And it's in the blending of those two like halves of the cosmos that creates us. There's like a sort of a love making that happens between the sky and the earth, and it produces life at the earth's surface.
It's also so interesting that the women's menstrual cycles, their moon, it used to be called their moon because women tend to be more impacted by the moon phases. Not to say that men aren't, but women are biologically impacted by the moon cycle, whereas the sun tends to be more masculine. And it's the, I don't want to say women are inconsistent, but when it comes to hormonal cycles of men, they're much more circular day by day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely related, and not just obviously to the menstrual cycle, but to all waters. You know, like since the blood is water, so the moon affects all the waters, and yeah. So I mean, they say like fixed and volatile. So the sun is considered to be fixed fire in the sense that it never actually stops shining. You know, I know if you lived in the UK, you might think the sun stops shining all the time, but of course it's just the clouds getting in the way, right? The sun is always shining and never stops. So it's fixed, and its timing is very strict as well. The timing of the sun is obviously very strict. You can set your watch by it. I mean, it's literally what we set our watch by. But the moon is irrational, and it's not meant to be a judgment of women, but you know, the moon is irrational mathematically. It doesn't, the cycles of the moon can't be expressed as like a whole number of days or hours or minutes or a whole number ratio even. It's actually an irrational number, which means it's always changing in relation to the sun. It's always like making new perspectives with the sun. And of course, it disappears from the sky completely for like 2.5 days a month. And it goes through this whole like pulsing of increasing brightness and disappearing away to nothing. So it's energetically the opposite of the sun, even though they're both exactly the same size, as we know from an eclipse.
Yeah, it's pretty profound. The other one that you brought up in, I mean, you brought up several charts that were just incredible, and I'd seen them before in some of your other presentations, but the one that I hadn't heard before is the Caduceus and the two energies, the Ida and Pingala.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can we talk? Yeah. Do you have that chart available with you right now?
I have it on my arm.
yeah, I know that. Yeah, you said show that in the book. You have it on your arm.
I don't have a quick one available right now, but
All
I
good.
think people,
Okay, it's all good.
it's
So,
like the
like, we're talking
AMA,
about
right?
the.
The American
Yeah,
Medical
go ahead. Go
Association.
ahead.
Yeah, yeah. It's the two snakes winding up a staff with wings on top.
You know what's interesting
Yeah,
is a lot of people in America, I think they're typically Christian leaning, think that represents something evil.
yeah. Even though it's worn, it's on the American Medical Association, so it does have an association with healing. And it was funny because
I would
I
say
got the
that's a
idea.
loose association with healing, though. But
Yeah,
yeah, I get what you're saying.
yeah. Um,
Like
but it's
historically, it
association with
has an association with
yeah,
healing. Yeah.
it has been used that way, but also in other ways as well. Um, and yeah, the Caduceus. I was looking into. I was thinking about getting a necklace, with it on, and I started looking, and they're called nurse necklaces.
Oh boy.
I was like, if you look on Amazon, search nurse necklace, you'll just find all these like Caduceus necklaces. I'm like, oh, I can't get a nurse necklace.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like it's obviously nothing to. It's older than that, It's like, but it's been appropriated by a lot of different organizations that used on their flag or on their logo or the coats of arms. But ultimately, it goes back to Hermes, the Greek god Hermes. The story goes back that he was given this staff with two snakes wound round and the wings on top. He was given it by Apollo in exchange for inventing the first musical instrument. So the story in the Greek mythology goes that Hermes made a lyra, which is basically like a guitar, but it's a tortoise shell, and he got some hairs from his mother's head and put the hairs on the lyra and made essentially what would have been the first guitar-like instrument. And as a reward for that, Apollo gave him this staff called the Caduceus, which means a herald's staff. And of course, a herald is someone who like a messenger, someone who says things to come, someone who can be trusted to convey information from the divine to everyone else, a divine messenger. And that's what Hermes was, and that's what Mercury is also. Mercury is Hermes in the Roman tradition. God Mercury is the equivalent of Hermes in the Greek tradition. And they're always depicted with a Caduceus. And so the Caduceus, as I understand it, it is symbolic of alchemy through this connection with Hermes, but also through healing and awakening. So the staff represents your spinal column, and the snakes spiraling up represent these two channels in the spinal column called the Ida and Pingala, which are said to spiral up your spinal column. And when you raise energy up, it causes like an awakening, which is represented by the wings. Wings, of course, are an air element. It's like wings are like freedom to move in the air, and the air is the element of the mind. So there's this sense with the wings representing like an awakened mind or a free mind. But also wings associated with angels, which are like the servants of God. So there's that as well. It's like sort of coming to God. And the snakes, they represent, well, our lower energy, our lower animal nature. Usually when you see snakes in alchemy, that's usually what it represents, is like that we have this lower animal nature that's kind of wily and hard to tame, but that our job is to like kind of tame it and like rise it up to the higher consciousness in the head. And anyway,
And
I
that's
ended
where
up with
some of
this
the like
tattoo.
Kundalini, like yogic traditions come in too.
Yeah, that's it. And so I ended up with this tattoo on my arm, which I got years ago. I can show it that well on there, but
What's so
it's
interesting is you say in the book you had originally done that based on DNA, like it was a strand of DNA, which we
yeah,
know is like fictitious. So, but it ends up looking exactly like a caduceus and that energy rising up.
yeah, exactly like it. I mean, it's even got 7 points of crossover, which the Caduceus has 7 points of crossover in the snake, representing the 7 chakras. But I've actually got the chakras in here. But of course, the chakras are aligned with the spinal column, So I don't have a staff, and I don't have any wings, but I've got the DNA is like fraying out at the top like wings.
It's too perfect.
So yeah, so I did that in 2008, and it was it meant something totally different then, and it wasn't until almost 10 years later I started looking into this symbol, the Caduceus, and then I was like, hang on, that looks a lot like that looks a lot like what I've got on my arm there. So yeah, it's a really interesting symbol, and yeah, it's definitely I think symbolic of alchemy and healing and awakening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's several other things I want to touch on. One being the periodic table of quote elements and how that is occulting the true elements, which we've touched on briefly here. But that I had also never heard articulated in that way. I'd thought about that as I'd come to understand like the true alchemical elements, which are so much more intuitive. We literally see them, play with them in everyday life, whereas the periodic table of elements has this just unintuitive absurdity about it, that like, how is this relevant in my life, but this is supposed to be the building blocks of reality? Makes absolutely no sense. Whereas this, like earth, air, water, and fire and ether, like that's we play with that every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. So there's no elements in the periodic table, like none whatsoever. And because I look back, I realized that actually the definition of the word element was changed in the 17th century, right? With the scientific revolution, they kind of appropriated the word element and they used it for these chemicals. But in fact, the chemicals are not elements, and the elements are not chemicals. The chemicals are produced from transmutation of the elements. And so the simplest example is hydrogen and oxygen, which are listed on the periodic table as elements, but actually are created from water and fire, right? It's like if you run electricity through water, you'll get hydrogen and oxygen produced at the anode and the cathode. So, hydrogen and oxygen are actually discoveries of man, and largely a product of human labor. We talk about, oh, there's oxygen, we breathe oxygen, and I know people are starting to question that as well. There's oxygen and hydrogen doing all this stuff in nature, but actually these are largely a product of human labor and the transmutation of the elements fire and water, and all of the so-called elements in the periodic table are products of transmutation of the earth. It happens like in the in mountains and under the ground, where there's like loads of pressure and temperature, and this is what alchemists are trying to recreate in their laboratories. Transmuting metal, they're just trying to recreate what's actually happening inside the earth with the temperatures and pressures that are necessary to transmute the earth into whatever it is, if it's a metal or a gemstone or something. But it's yeah. Sorry, lost train of thought there.
No, you're good, because I had another thing that popped up in my mind, that like when we say we're exposing ourselves to the elements or get out in the elements, we're not meaning get out and experience zirconium. We're talking about getting out and experiencing the elements, the true elements. You know what I mean? Like no one says, yeah, I was out in the elements and like zirconium was slapping me in the face. It's like, no, that was the air via the wind, or I was very cold because I immersed myself in cold water, or in snow, which is just another form of water. No one said refers to the periodic table. When we say the elements, we're already naturally referring to the 5 true elements.
Yeah, that's it. And yeah, I mean, it kind of gives the game away when you start getting higher up the periodic table. Like some of the entries are just totally absurd. Like this one called Tennesseum, and they say it has a half-life of 50 milliseconds, which is literally the blink of an eye. So, they created it and then it disappeared 50 milliseconds later. And they call it an element, but, it's really just an incident. If it was anything at all, it's just an incident, a momentary happening in time. That's all. But they've called it an element because they believe they created a new type of atom. And that's what the periodic table is. It's a table of atoms, it's based on the atomic number. And it's periodic because, well, I mean, numbers are periodic, right? It's like it's a periodic table because it's, going up in basically one step at a time up the atomic mass, which is really the density of the substance. So it's like a table that orders substances according to their density. in a periodic way. But yeah, all of those substances are actually produced through transmutation of the four, essential elements.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
question that I have related to, let's say, external alchemy, for lack of a better term, right now, I can't think of a better way to describe it. Because there's a whole element of inner alchemy that I kind of want to close on, like the internal process of alchemy. But in terms of the external alchemy, understanding the elements, um, would you say that you have used this understanding for self-awareness? Like you have some of the charts in the book that I've seen you share with me before, related to like the earth, air, water, and fire as it relates to basically how you're constituted in this lifetime. And then you bring in some of the uh, pieces of the zodiac and how each house is related to the specific, like, I'm a water sign, I'm a Cancer, which I think is a cardinal water sign, as you lay out in the book. So I think
Mhm.
that's the general question I'm asking is, have you used this to know more about yourself?
Yes. So, I didn't actually get into this in the book, but I did go into it in the end of COVID stuff a bit, like the idea of the elemental constitution. And this is where you take an astrological chart of someone, the chart of the stars and planets at the time they were born, and then from that you can derive the elements that are sort of present in their constitution, as it were. And then this can help you diagnose, because you can sort of see like tendencies that people have because of their elemental constitution. So just as a simple example, I have a lot of fire and air in my constitution, right? But not a lot of water and not a lot of earth. So you could say that you would expect from that someone to be quite heady, like up in the airy realm, like in the mind, and quite fiery, like quite a lot to say, or a fiery energy about them. But then lacking in water, you might say maybe is not so emotional, right? And I've been accused of being an emotional robot before, or maybe not being sensitive to things, whereas someone who had lots of water in their chart might be more sensitive, more emotional, more empathic, or someone who has lots of earth in their chart might be more uh, practical, more hands-on, like really good at like working with things with their hands, maybe more drawn to like vegetables and vegetarianism. I mean, I had a friend who I did a reading for, and he's like a hardcore vegan. He's like he's so into it, like, and he does it really well. He spends so much money on food and everything. He's big into it. I looked at his chart, and it was almost all earth. I'd never seen so much like earth, but the earth element is associated with the vegetables, and so yeah, whereas fire element is associated with red meat, so I would expect someone who has high fire in their chart to be, more of a carnivore, but someone who has high earth maybe be more of a vegetarian, So it's things like this. And I would actually like to, for my next book, to be about this and really kind of dive into this deeply, because there's so much you can derive from understanding someone's elemental constitution. And I don't know if there's any books out there at the moment, but I think it's even more powerful than the regular astrology. It's like if you actually get into elemental astrology, then you get so much more information about yourself or your clients, or whoever you're doing readings for. So yeah, very interesting stuff, and definitely want the subject of a future book.
Is that something that
Yeah.
you developed, or is that something that you learned through looking into like occult alchemy texts?
Um, I don't think I developed it. As I understand it, that was kind of how it was like back in the day. They would look, well. There was
Like
the
common
system of,
knowledge?
yeah. Well, there was the humor system. This idea of
Yeah,
like humors. So we're said to have like four liquids in the body. What is it, like black bile? Oh gosh, I can't remember them all now. But the humor is basically a liquid corresponding to each of the four elements,
got it.
and they believed that the balance of those liquids in your body was your elemental constitution. But that theory didn't really seem to have it didn't really take off or really do that well. But I think it's because you can't really measure these liquids, you know it, but you can look at somebody's chart and see the elements that are contained in their core, like light body, right? It's like that's how the configuration of the lights in the sky at the moment you took your first breath. It's like it tells you something about your uniqueness,
Yeah.
your unique constitution. But of
Especially
course,
with
when it
what
comes to
Eileen's been doing. I don't know if you've looked into that recently, but she's been taking the zodiac, so your chart, and overlaying it over your biofield, of which there are 12 bands of the biofield, and actually finding where the celestial bodies and the luminaries are in your chart based on the sound of the tuning fork.
wow, yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, there's something in the birth chart for sure, and a lot of information about it, a lot of self-knowledge from studying my own birth chart as well. Then there's also the issue with sidereal astrology and tropical, which I don't know, you might want to get in here, but yeah, in some ways the sidereal chart is actually more accurate, I find, than the tropical chart, but maybe that's for another
Yeah,
conversation.
that's for another conversation. I'm interviewing a few astrologers coming up. So, the other thing I want to talk about is the vessels of transformation, because I think it's like there's an allegory in that for just the inner processes, but also for it's a practical way of viewing how you create in life. So you have the lab, the forge, and the crucible. So can you
Mm.
touch on that?
Sure. Yeah. So again, in an old school alchemy sense, you'd have like your laboratory or whatever, your castle, which is your laboratory, where your place of work and prayer. Laboratory actually means labor, and auditory, which is labor is work, and auditory is like prayer or speech. So it's a place of work and prayer, unlike a lab, which is just a place of work only. So, the alchemist has a laboratory that is not just a place for work, but also has books and stuff for study as well. And then the forge would be the place, essentially where you're able to bring controlled fire, where you're able to control fire. And, a forge is essentially a fireplace. Um, and then the crucible is the container, like the pots and pans that you're using to do the work in, to actually melt the metals or to transform the material. But those are also symbolic. Like I think of it like the computers. So I have my lab here, which is the cabin. I have my computer, which is like my forge, because it's actually controlled fire. The computer is pulling in fire from the electricity plugs, and allowing me to manipulate fire in a very precise way. And so I consider the computer as a kind of forge. And not only that, but a computer is the product of the forge. A computer is something that was made from metal and fire. And then I would say then the software we use, like as a musician or whatever kind of work you do, then the software package that is on your computer is then the crucible, because that's where then the detailed transformational work is actually taking place within the forge, within the laboratory. And it's the whole thing sort of reflects back on us as well. It's like our body is the laboratory as well, and like our soul is like the forge. Our soul is like the crucible, and the spirit is like the forge. It reflects back like into us as well. And so the idea with alchemy is that when you do your work in an alchemical way, you're also transforming yourself in the process. You're not
Yeah.
just transforming the material, you're also transforming yourself if you do it in the right way. And I even think that that's where they got the idea from in quantum mechanics. This idea that like your observation affects the outcome of the measurement. That's often one of the new quantum ideas. They say, oh, when you look at things, you're changing it. But the alchemists understood this like long ago, like that actually the way you work with things affects like how you change, as a result of the work.
Yeah. Would you
It's,
say vice versa? Like the way you change also affects your work, so that your work affects you, and it's like this co-creative process, like you affecting your work affecting you, and this sort of like
yeah,
spiral upward, if you will.
yeah, for sure. It's like you are your work in a way. A
Right.
lot of people say that there's no real separation between the artist and the art, because um, yeah, I mean, well, people even say like the only thing you truly own is that which you created yourself, right? It's like everything else is sort of like given to you. But um, so yeah, that makes sense to me. It's yeah,
Yeah. The other thing I
yeah,
want to talk about is the significance of the number 7 with respect to alchemy, because that was something pretty incredible that you laid out in the book in the 7 alchemical processes.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the 7, well, when you get the 4 and the 3 together, so the 4 elements and the 3 principles, what we find is that there's a process, like an actual, physical process that derives from each of those. So from fire, we get calcination, which is the application of fire. That could be just heating or roasting or pulverizing or shaking or, you know, radiating or even like playing sound to something, because the sound is vibration as a kind of fire. So calcination is about applying fire to something and purifying it, even like drying tea leaves, for example. And then dissolution is a water element process, which is dissolving in water. And, we know, of course, you dissolve things in water and then separate them out. They become purified. They get purified through the dissolution. And then separation is an air process. So separation is, as what it says on the tin, is just about separating things and putting like with like, so things that are muddled together, take them apart, put like with like, organize them, filter them, sift, and that's an air element correspondence. And then you have the earth process, which is conjunction, which is actually like bringing things together. So you've separated all your ingredients, and then the conjunction is when you bring them all together in right balance. And that's associated with earth because you're kind of actually creating a thing, like a physical thing at that point. And then there's 3 more processes which correspond with the salt, sulfur, and mercury. The next one is fermentation, which is a death and rebirth process in in the production of alcohol. The fermentation, it breaks down the sugar, and the sugar is converted to alcohol. So basically, the sugar, which is an organic living thing, is broken down, killed, and becomes spirit, which is spirit. It's a dead thing. The death of life produces spirit, and that's in the fermentation process.
By the
And
way,
then
I
the
wish
distillation.
I wish we said spirit as cool as you guys do in Scotland, because it just sounds way cooler when you guys say it.
I don't know. Like
Every time I've heard you say that over the last 2 years, anytime I'm on a call with you, I'm like, fuck, I wish I had his accent. That is so cool.
I've been recording my audiobooks, so I'm making sure to pronounce my T's.
Yeah.
As Scottish people, we do these like glottal T's where it's like Scottish
Yeah.
instead of Scottish.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty lazy. I do it all the time, but
I love it though. Okay, sorry, I had to because so
the 6th process of alchemy is distillation, which corresponds with the spirit, and distillation is when you heat a substance gently, and it actually separates the least dense parts of the substance separate first, rise up the distiller, where they're then cooled and separated into another vessel. And then that's called the spirit because it's less dense, it's more volatile than the liquid that remains behind. And of course, that's how they get spirit from, say, in the alcoholic process, right? Like in making whiskey or vodka or something like that. The distillation is a crucial component. So it's the purification of the spirit of the plant that they started with. And then the final stage of alchemy is coagulation, which is associated with salt, because coagulation is about something non-physical becoming physical, like coming into body, like crystallization or materialization, like becoming a body. So those are the 7 processes, but the number 7 is all over the place in alchemy and all like ancient science and in religion and stuff as well. 7 cardinal sins and 7 cardinal virtues and all that, and it all goes back to what they call the septenary, which are the 7 wandering bodies in the night sky. So you've got the sun and the moon, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury. And those 7 lights are unique among all of the lights in the sky because they have these wandering paths, whereas all the other stars move in circles, like perfect, like fixed circles. That's why they're called the fixed stars. But there's these 7 wanderers, and they get called by lots of different names, like the 7 rulers. In the Hermetic tradition, they call them the 7 rulers. Yeah, there's lots of different names for them, and they have different names in different cultures as well. Different names in the Norse, different names in Greek, different names in Egyptian, different names in Roman. But they're all talking about the same thing: those 7 lights in the sky that seem to direct the changes down here on Earth. Now, not in a way that takes away your free will, though, but just it's like light. It's fire. It's moving things. It causes things to move in certain ways. Which, of course, in astrology is the science of, really understand it, looking at those lights and predicting like how events are going to unfold based on what they're doing. So the number 7 then from there, it comes into alchemy in all kinds of ways. And I talk about just one of the fun ones is the 7 holes in the head, and that was kind of new to me. I didn't learn that till I was like 40 years old. I'm like, Ricky, I knew there was 10 fingers and 10 toes, but I never noticed that I've got 7 holes in my head. It's right there, it's like so close. Like, why did I never count the holes in my head before? And talking to people about it, I think most people don't know that, and it's just one of those examples where the number 7 is right up close, really fundamental and close to you. Things like the heart, the heart has 7 chambers in it, and people say it's actually a 7-sided form. There was some science about that. A guy came out, it's called the chestahedron. He created a platonic solid, as it were, with 7 sides, which corresponds to the shape of the heart.
It also is like 7 points of reality. There's up, down, left, right, back, front, and then you are the center point in that. That's 7.
And in, yeah, exactly. So the 7 just crops up everywhere. So it was worth creating a whole chapter just devoted to the 7. Because it sort of manifests in so many ways in creation.
The other thing that you talked about that's coming to mind is the different mudras in some like yogic practices, and how, I forget exactly it, you'll lay it out way better than I can, but I think it's the middle finger relates to ether, and then I forget which fingers relate to what, but based on how you configure your hands, or when you come together to pray, that's ether likening with ether, and in your you explain it better than I could, so you go ahead.
I mean, I'm not very well practiced with mudras, but looking into them, that was what I got to understand, was that like each mudra is sort of connecting elements in different ways, like a circuit. So the element on each of the fingers of your hand, and ether is the middle finger. That's why it's so offensive. That's what I've been told. That's why it's such an offensive thing, right? Because they don't.
Because it's offensive to the scientific establishment, and that makes sense. Yeah.
So with the mudras, they'll connect. I mean, in a prayer position, right? You're connecting each finger to its corresponding other. So it's water to water, fire to fire, ether to ether, earth to earth, and so on. But the other ones, and I didn't really show pictures of them in the book. I just wanted to explain the basic principle. But there's hundreds of mudras, and they connect like circuits. So connecting fire to air, will produce a different effect connecting fire to water, for example. And if you want to understand what that effect might be, then just consider what happens with fire and air is maybe more explosive, whereas fire and water will like cancel each other out a bit. So
or like water and earth is very grounding, or something like that.
Yeah. So I'm no expert on mudras, but really just wanted to help people understand that is where that's coming from. It's an elemental sort of connection that you're making there, and in a way you're reconfiguring your body. So if you think of the body's an antenna, because it's so full of water, and water is like essentially an antenna of infinite bandwidth. It's able to receive frequencies of all vibrations. So when we reconfigure our body electrically, we're essentially reconfiguring the antenna, and I think that allows us to access different states of consciousness. channel other energies and stuff. But as I say, I'm no expert in the actual practice of mudras.
Yeah, I just thought that was super interesting though, and it made sense. It's just interesting how when you explore alchemy, it seems to be that it's just pointing you back to very simple things in reality, and how that, I don't like saying fractal because for me that still implies quantum, but it's like a fractalized nature of reality, as above, so below. And so
Yeah.
many different symbols are pointing us back to ourselves. And that brings me to the next piece. I have two more questions. And one is related to inner alchemy. How has exploring alchemy itself, just like the alchemical arts, helped you with your inner processes?
Well, I mean, ultimately, just grounding. Feeling like everything makes sense. I mean, when I say everything, I'm talking about everything in nature, not necessarily humanity, which is a whole
Right,
other
right.
thing to make sense out of. But yeah, nature, which is what I sought out to understand. Was to understand fundamental nature of reality. But it was always, so kind of confusing and like this giant mystery until I started to understand alchemy and the elements. And so, there's a satisfaction that comes from that, and just my approach to everything now, like doing things yourself are more easy than they used to be, right? It's like, before then it's like, oh, I need an expert, I
Right.
can't possibly do that. I need an expert, or I have to buy this product or that or whatever. But um, it just becomes more apparent how to just do things yourself. And it's actually easier than you expected once you understand just earth, air, and fire and water. And yeah, with it changed the way I make music, and my whole approach to music, which became more about healing and personal transformation than about just like raging and partying, right? It's like, but when I started out, it was just about the party and like having fun and everything. But then
Do you use
it
the
completely changed.
seven processes when you create music? I know you talk about audio alchemy towards the end of the book.
Yeah. Yeah, so I developed when I first learned about the 7 steps. My initial impression was that, well, this is just like how I make music. I was able to, all the different things I do to make music, or that really anybody does to make music. I was able to see how they fit into those
Yeah.
7 categories, and so I developed a whole system for music production called audio alchemy. And I taught that, and yes, that is how I approach it. And but it's maybe not so as methodical as it sounds. Like the more like the benefit of the 7 steps is to help people understand all the processes necessary in the creation of a piece of music from nothing, from just raw material to a finished product, which is to say from the lead to the gold.
Mhm.
The lead is really any raw material or starting product, and the gold is the goal. The
Right.
gold is the goal of the work. So I took that, applied it to music, and as well as defining the elements of music. So relating, for example, that the element of earth relates to rhythm and drums and percussion, and the element of water relates to bass and chords. The element of the element of air relates to melody and lyrics, and the element of fire relates to modulation and timbre and dynamics. So I created a system for making music, but I also made all the correspondences between everything in music and everything in alchemy, and showing that they have a correspondence, so that music is a kind of alchemy, and everything in music relates to everything in alchemy. And so I tried to lay that out in the book without getting too much into music production, because realizing most people are not music producers, and actually
I mean,
most
it's
music
it's
producers
helpful
don't,
though to
don't
see
read books.
how you've taken these alchemical processes and applied them to your own work so that others can do the same. Because it
Yes.
really is an incredible, I hesitate to call it framework because it's not so rigid, but it is, for lack of a better term, an incredible framework to sort of contextualize how you create something out of nothing, or just the
Yeah.
creation process itself, but then also the process of becoming internally. And I liken it to the book The Red Lion. I'm not sure if you've read that book, but yeah, but that's using external, how do I put this? The journey that the red line takes you on is a journey of inner alchemy, really following the 7 processes in the internal to face your shadow and work off karma to create gold out of yourself.
Mhm.
And that's
Mhm.
an incredible application in the least of these 7 processes internally to become a more purified, better version of yourself.
Yeah, it's like we are the earth. We are the earth to be purified. That's one of the like dictums of alchemy. Is visit the interior lands and rectify to find the hidden stone. It's a kind of cryptic thing, but it's talking about visiting the interior lands of you're the earth. People think it's all about like going underground and digging holes, going in caves and stuff like that to visit the interior parts of the earth, but it's about going inside yourself because you are the earth that needs to be rectified. Earth is rough. Earth is imperfect. Earth contains impurities. In fact, of the 4 elements, earth is the least pure.
Mm.
And fire is the most pure, then air, then water, and then earth. Earth is the dirtiest element, if you like. So, we as earth are born with imperfections and impurities, and it's through our own inner work that we're able to,
Being forged in the
rectify.
fire, which is interesting because the fire is the most pure. So you purify yourself through. That's like people talk about when you do the inner work, you're going into the fire. You're forging yourself
Yeah.
in fire to become more pure.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, ordeals of fire, which can, like what we all just went through these last few years, like of being like constantly like gaslit. I mean,
Yeah.
gaslit, right there, that's a fire
Gaslit. Yeah.
correspondence, right? It's
Yeah.
like
Wow.
like being like lied to or accused or like insulted, attacked, all that kind of stuff. That's like an ordeal of fire, and yeah, it's not pleasant at the time, but it's sort of it gives you metal, right? it creates metal in your being, makes you more resistant to that kind of thing in the future. um so yeah, the fire is purifying, but then so is the water, in a different way. But yeah, the earth is fundamentally is rough and impure, and so as beings of earth, we have work to do to purify ourselves and sort of smooth out the edges and all that.
All right. So if you are interested in getting this book, A Fool's Wisdom, I highly recommend it. When I got halfway through it, I shared it in my Telegram channel. I was like, this book is incredible. At the least, having a theoretical nuclear physicist, or I guess you would call yourself a former theoretical nuclear physicist at this point, kind of
Yeah.
how Tom says he's formerly a doctor, speak out about scientism. And, I've been interacting with and befriending people who speak out about the medical aspect of scientism, but I've not heard someone coming from the other areas of scientism speak out against those other areas of scientism. You're the first that I know of. Hopefully you inspire other people to do the same, because this book is truly incredible. It's an incredible account of authentic expression and pointing us towards the true art and the true science that is alchemy, which I've become sort of obsessed with as of late, especially after reading The Red Lion and looking into Rosicrucianism and reading, I guess you could say some of Steiner's work touches on it, but just going down this path of alchemy. And it just recontextualizes, as Steve and I have said, some of these sort of mysterious seemingly woo woo or just absurd theoretical quantum things, and puts it back into reality when you bring back in the 5 elements, and it just grounds you in reality and it makes sense of things in your life. And it's been incredible for me. So Steve, thank you so much for writing this incredible book. I cannot recommend it enough.
Oh, thank you, Alec, and thanks for having me on. It's been absolutely great chatting to you. Yeah, I I really appreciate everyone who stuck their neck out, before me to bring us the truth on, germ theory and heliocentrism and gravity and all these things. Um, for me, I was like seeing all this going on, and I was thinking, well, they're telling the truth. The truth is out there. It's like everyone's going to find out, but and I didn't really think my qualifications even mattered, because I thought, really, these people have done such a good job of putting the truth out there. What does it even matter if I say something? But then I began to realize, well, it does matter for some people. It does matter to someone who actually worked in it and had the qualifications. Is saying it again. So even though I'm not saying anything particularly new, or these criticisms of scientism have been around for years. I just try to bring it all together and share with you that I agree. I agree with these criticisms, for whatever that's worth. But don't get blackpilled, because yes, the science is bunk, but there is a beautiful ancient science that's there and accessible to all, and you don't need a degree or some expert to teach you about it. You can just dive right in and start learning about it today. So
aside from your book, is there any other books that you recommend, or texts or places to look on alchemy that we could also link in the show notes?
I mean, I could provide you with a reading list. I remember now, you asked me that a few months ago. Sorry about that.
It's all good. That was for my own personal seeking of alchemy, by the way. So
well, the hermetic stuff is a great place to start. Like Kabbalion, or the
correct me if I'm wrong. There's 7 hermetic principles.
Yes. Yeah.
That's also interesting. Another point of 7.
Well, the Kabbalion is brilliant. It's very well written, and that was a big one for me. And the Emerald Tablet. There's a book called the Emerald Tablets of Transformation by Dennis Hawk. Really amazing book, honestly. So well written and very enlightening. Great places to start, but yeah, there's tons of books out there. It's really there's lots to learn.
And, I'll hold you to getting me a reading list so I can throw it in the show notes.
Okay. All right then. Fair enough.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining me, Stephen. Please check out A Fool's Wisdom. That will be in the show notes. Highly recommend reading this book. It's incredible. And thanks again, Steve, for joining me.
Thank you very much, Alec.